Hello, and welcome to Mind Sherlock, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today, I bring you a brand new Sherlock Holmes mystery, filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel the case together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now, let's get started. It was upon a bleak autumn evening in the year 1895 that this most peculiar case was brought to our attention. A damp fog, thick and impenetrable, coiled through the streets of London, muffling the clip-clop of hansom cabs and distorting the glow of gas lamps into pale, ghostly orbs. I remember well how the fire in our sitting room at 221B Baker Street crackled in defiance of the chill that crept in beneath the door, casting flickering shadows against the walls lined with Holmes's monographs and case files. Sherlock Holmes lay stretched upon the settee, his sharp, ascetic features relaxed in contemplation, while I occupied myself with a medical journal, though my mind was more preoccupied with the peculiar silence that pervaded our rooms that night. Holmes had been uncharacteristically subdued, offering little but the occasional flick of his eyes toward the smouldering embers. "I presume, Watson, that you are waiting for something to disturb the monotony," he remarked at last, his gaze never shifting from the fire. I smiled at his intuition. "I confess that there is a certain peace to an evening undisturbed by sudden alarms, though I doubt it shall last long." Holmes inclined his head, as though in agreement. "It never does," he mused. Indeed, I was soon to be proven correct, for even as the clock upon the mantel struck the hour, there came a sudden, frantic rapping at our door. Holmes sat up at once, his lean frame taut with interest. "Ah, Watson," he murmured, a gleam in his grey eyes. "Our visitor has arrived, and if I am not mistaken, he brings with him the scent of fear." The knock came again, sharp and insistent. Holmes, ever one for dramatic effect, waited just a moment longer before uttering a crisp, "Enter!" The door swung open to reveal a man of slight frame, his overcoat drawn tightly about him, as if to ward off more than just the cold. His face, pale and drawn, bore the unmistakable mark of one haunted by unseen horrors. He stepped forward hesitantly, his gaze darting about the room as though fearful that even within these walls he was not safe. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he inquired, his voice barely above a whisper. Holmes rose with effortless grace and motioned toward a chair. "And you, sir, are a man who has spent the last several nights in restless torment," he said, studying him keenly. "Pray, sit down. You have the air of one pursued." The man, startled, obeyed at once. "My name is Edwin Forsyth," he began, his fingers gripping the brim of his hat with nervous intensity. "I do not know if you will credit what I have to tell you, Mr. Holmes, but I assure you, I am a man of reason, a man of numbers and finance. And yet, I have seen—" He broke off, shaking his head. Holmes steepled his fingers. "You have seen something which logic cannot explain." Forsyth swallowed hard. "Yes," he whispered, "something not of this world." Watson, ever the pragmatist, straightened in his chair. "Surely you do not mean—" "A ghost," Forsyth interrupted, his voice shaking. "Or something very like it. Mr. Holmes, I was attacked, inside my own study, in a room locked from within. I felt it, cold fingers, tightening around my throat. And yet when I turned up the gaslight, I was alone." A heavy silence fell upon the room. I felt an involuntary shiver crawl up my spine, but Holmes merely leaned forward, his expression impassive. And yet, Mr. Forsyth, you are here before me, quite unharmed, he observed. Tell me, when did this phantom first make itself known to you? Forsyth hesitated, his lips trembling. 3 nights ago. But there is something more, something worse. The servants whisper that it is a curse, a vengeance from the underworld. Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. Indeed, he murmured. Then, Mr. Forsyth, I believe you have come to the right place. Tell me everything. Forsyth's hands trembled as he brought them together, his voice scarcely above a whisper. It was as real as you sitting before me, Mr. Holmes. The fingers, cold as death itself, tightened around my throat. I could not move. I could not cry out. It was as if an unseen spectre had risen from the grave to claim me. Holmes, ever composed, merely inclined his head. And yet, Mr. Forsyth, here you sit before me, unharmed. Pray, continue. Forsyth swallowed hard. I had been working late in my study. The room was locked. I am certain of it, for I have long held a habit of turning the key upon retiring. The windows are barred. No man could have entered. And yet, as the hour grew late, I felt it. Watson leaned forward. Felt what, sir? A presence. A shifting in the air, though I was alone. The candle flickered, though there was no breeze. And then Forsyth gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. The hands, cold and unseen, closed around my throat. Watson could not suppress a shudder. And when you turned on the light... Nothing, Forsyth whispered. Not a sign of intrusion. The door still locked, the window still barred. But my throat ached, as if gripped by some skeletal force. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Holmes drummed his fingers upon the armrest, his expression unreadable. And your household staff, what do they make of it? Forsyth hesitated. They speak of a curse, Mr. Holmes, a retribution from the past. They whisper that my family is marked for vengeance. Holmes did not so much as blink. Vengeance, you say? That, my dear Watson, is a word far more earthly than supernatural. Holmes's keen eyes locked onto Forsyth. Tell me, sir, what exactly do they mean by vengeance? The banker shifted uneasily, his gaze darting toward the fire as though seeking solace in its glow. It is an old tale, one my family has long sought to bury. My grandfather, Reginald Forsyth, was once connected to certain figures in London's underworld. Holmes' fingers steepled before him. The Hades League, Forsyth exhaled sharply. You know of them? A notorious syndicate, Holmes murmured, his gaze alight with interest. Theirs was a name that struck fear in the hearts of men. But I was under the impression that the League was eradicated decades ago. Forsyth nodded. So it was believed. But before his execution, one of their leaders, Joseph Riggs, known as the Wraith, swore that my grandfather's bloodline would suffer for what he called a betrayal beyond pardon. My father dismissed it as the ravings of a condemned man. But now, he hesitated before reaching into his coat. Now, I cannot ignore it. From within the folds of his jacket, he withdrew a black envelope. Holmes took it without a word, his deft fingers extracting a single playing card. The ace of spades, its corner stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Watson inhaled sharply. A death omen. Forsyth nodded, his voice barely audible. It arrived the night before the attack. For a long moment, Holmes remained silent, his grey eyes fixed upon the card as though it contained the answers he sought. Then, with the barest trace of a smile, he flicked it onto the table. Mr. Forsyth, he said, rising from his chair, you may rest assured. This is no ghost you are dealing with. This is something far more tangible, and therefore something I can unmask. Watson, Fetch your coat. We have an investigation to begin. The drive to Forsyth's estate in Kensington was a silent one. Holmes, ever lost in thought, sat motionless beside me, his eyes half-lidded in a state of meditative contemplation. The cab rattled through the streets, the gas lamps casting long skeletal shadows through the dense, suffocating fog. The night air held a peculiar weight, pressing upon the senses with an oppressive stillness. As we approached the house, I noted its grim, austere facade, the windows dark save for a single flickering glow on the upper floor. There was an air of neglect about the place, as though it had been abandoned to its own melancholy. The effect was heightened by the hushed, hurried whispers of the household staff, who greeted us with wary glances before quickly vanishing into the shadows. Holmes observed them keenly. "You will note, Watson," he murmured as we ascended the steps, "that fear, once sown, spreads like a disease. These men and women are prisoners to their own superstitions." Before I could respond, the front door opened, revealing Edwin Forsyth himself. The man looked no better than he had at Baker Street. His face was pale, his movements restless. He motioned us inside with a trembling hand. "It is worse than before," he whispered hoarsely. "The servants refuse to enter the study after dark. They say they hear sounds, whispers, in the empty room. And tonight, Mr. Holmes, I felt it again. The presence. I am certain of it." Holmes offered no immediate reply, but his gaze swept the dimly lit hallway, taking in every minute detail. A grandfather clock ticked softly in the distance, its steady rhythm the only sound in the oppressive silence. "Take us to the study," Holmes said at last. "And, if you value your peace of mind, Mr. Forsyth, steel yourself, for ghosts are rarely as incorporeal as they seem." The study was an elegant, well-appointed chamber, its heavy oak furnishings exuding the solemn dignity of an old and respectable household. A grand mahogany desk stood at its centre, flanked by rows of towering bookshelves, their contents meticulously arranged. A single velvet chair rested before the hearth, and upon its surface, faint but unmistakable, was the impression of a recently vacated seat. Holmes strode forward, his eyes darting across the room in swift appraisal. "The door was locked when you entered, Mr. Forsyth." "From the inside," Forsyth confirmed. "I had to force it open this morning. And the windows, barred, as they have always been. No man could have entered." I moved to the door, testing its solidity. It was heavy and well fitted, with a robust lock that, if engaged, would indeed prevent any external entry. The window, too, was secure, its iron bars undisturbed, rendering the notion of an intruder impossible. Holmes, meanwhile, had begun his own examination, moving with the silent precision of a predator in its element. His fingertips traced the edges of the desk, pausing over the inkwell, then along the bookshelves. He bent low, scrutinizing the carpet, then straightened abruptly and strode to the fireplace. Something in the hearth had caught his attention. Reaching down, he retrieved a small object and held it up to the light. It was a single black feather. Forsyth inhaled sharply. What does it mean?" Holmes twirled the feather between his fingers, his expression unreadable. "An anomaly, certainly," he murmured. "But whether it is of consequence remains to be seen." He slipped it into his pocket and turned to the chair before the fireplace. "And this," he continued, gesturing to the faint impression on the velvet, "suggests that someone sat here not long ago. Mr. Forsyth, are you quite certain you were alone?" Forsyth paled. "Absolutely. The study was locked when I entered. No one could have come or gone." Holmes said nothing, but his gaze remained fixed upon the chair, his mind evidently weaving together the strands of an unseen pattern. At last he turned to Forsyth with a peculiar smile. "Come, Watson. We have seen enough for now. The night is long, and the truth, I suspect, is but a shadow away." Holmes had been uncharacteristically silent since our examination of Forsyth's study, his long fingers steepled before him as he sat in quiet contemplation. The presence of the black feather and the phantom grip that had terrorized our client seemed to weigh little upon his mind, and yet I knew that every fragment of this puzzle was already being examined by his razor-sharp intellect. Forsyth, however, was not at ease. He stood by the fireplace, running a hand through his dishevelled hair, his nerves clearly frayed. "Mr. Holmes," he said at last, his voice strained, "do you believe in curses?" Holmes arched an eyebrow. "Not in the least." Forsyth let out a hollow laugh. "Then I envy your certainty. You see, my family has long been marked by misfortune, and I fear that it has come to claim me at last." He strode toward his desk and pulled open a drawer with an unsteady hand. From within, he retrieved a bundle of old newspaper clippings, yellowed with age, and placed them before us. Holmes unfolded one with deliberate care. "The Hades League," he murmured, his sharp eyes scanning the print. "The very same," Forsyth confirmed. "My grandfather, Reginald Forsyth, was once entangled with that foul organisation. It was said that he turned against them, aiding Scotland Yard in dismantling their operations. Many of their leaders were executed. Among them," he hesitated, his face pale. I took up the next clipping and read aloud. "Joseph the Wraith Riggs, sentenced to death for conspiracy, murder and treason." "Riggs," Forsyth whispered, "a man who thrived on terror. He was said to be able to slip in and out of rooms unseen, striking from the shadows before vanishing like smoke. Before his execution, he swore vengeance on my grandfather. 'Your family will never escape the reach of the underworld,' he said. And now, I wonder if his words have finally come true." Holmes turned the page over, his face unreadable. "A man's dying words carry weight, Mr. Forsyth, but they do not raise him from the grave. The dead hold no grip over the living. That belongs to those who still walk among us." Forsyth hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a black envelope. The paper was thick, expensive, and sealed with a blood-red wax insignia. He placed it upon the table before us, his fingers trembling. "This arrived the night before the attack," he murmured. Holmes took it up with delicate precision, breaking the seal and extracting the single playing card within, the ace of spades. The lower right corner was stained dark, as though marked with dried blood. I inhaled sharply. "A death omen." Forsyth nodded. It was the symbol of the Hades League. They would send it to those marked for execution. My grandfather received one before Riggs was arrested. And now, he swallowed. Now I have received one as well. Holmes turned the card over between his fingers, holding it up to the lamplight. "Curious," he murmured. "The print is new, not an antique. The ink fresh. The hand that placed this into your letterbox, Mr. Forsyth, is very much alive." Forsyth's expression darkened. "Then you believe this is—" "Not the work of a phantom," Holmes interrupted, "but of a man who wishes to be one." I could not suppress a shiver at Holmes's remark. The evidence was mounting in favour of something far more tangible than a supernatural entity. And yet, the phantom grip, the whispers in the night, and now the ominous playing card, all seem calculated to evoke fear rather than simple malice. "You seem remarkably unfazed by all this, Holmes," I said. Holmes smiled thinly. Because I see no ghost, Watson. I see a scheme. The so-called ghostly grip is not the work of a spirit, but a calculated illusion designed to instill terror in Mr. Forsyth. Forsyth leaned forward. Then, who? Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. That, my dear sir, is what we shall now endeavour to discover. But rest assured, the dead do not send playing cards. The living, however, that is another matter entirely. Holmes tapped the ace of spades upon the desk with quiet finality. Come, Watson, it is time we turned our attention to those who have not yet met their graves. The remnants of the Hades League await us. Holmes was in a mood of peculiar restlessness as we made our way through the labyrinthine alleys of Soho, where gaslight cast feeble pools of yellow against the damp, glistening cobblestones. He had insisted upon seeking out Madame Lucia Varnet, a name I had not heard in some years, but which evidently held significance to him. Varnet is a woman of remarkable instincts, Watson, he remarked as we walked. She is neither a fool nor a mystic, though she has made a profession of appearing both. In her time, she has been a most useful informant. We arrived at a narrow, ill-kept doorway over which hung a battered sign reading, Madame Lucia, Seer of the Vale. Holmes rapped sharply upon the wood, and a moment later the door creaked open to reveal a woman swathed in dark silks, her piercing eyes assessing us from beneath a heavy hood. You should not have come, Mr. Holmes, she muttered. There are things better left undisturbed. Holmes stepped past her without hesitation. And yet here I am. Inside, the room was dimly lit by the flickering glow of an oil lamp, its air thick with the scent of burning herbs. She moved behind a table draped in velvet, her hands resting upon its surface as she regarded Holmes warily. You seek knowledge of the Forsyth curse, she whispered. You seek answers to what should not be questioned. Holmes's expression did not change. Tell me what you know. The dead walk among us, she murmured. The wraith does not rest. Forsyth is marked, as his father was before him. He cannot escape the grip of the underworld. I scoffed. Superstition and shadows. Her eyes darted to me, and for the briefest moment, I felt an unnatural chill. And yet, Doctor, have you not seen the signs with your own eyes? Holmes regarded her coolly. If a man wishes to be feared as a ghost, he must first convince others that he is one. That is the trick of your trade, is it not, madam? She stiffened. Leave this alone, Mr. Holmes. Some things are better left unsolved. As we stepped back into the fog-laden street, I turned to Holmes. Surely you don't credit her warnings. Holmes smiled thinly. Not in the slightest, but fear, Watson. That is a far deadlier weapon than any knife, and someone is wielding it with great skill. We had scarcely returned to 221B Baker Street when a furious rapping at the door announced the arrival of yet another desperate messenger. It was a young footman, breathless and pale, who gasped out a tale of horror and commotion at the Forsyth estate. Holmes required no further urging. Within the hour, we found ourselves once more in the great, dimly lit halls of Forsyth's Kensington home, where a household in turmoil awaited us. The butler met us at the door, his composure badly shaken. It is Mr. Forsyth's valet, sirs. He was found in the study. Not a sound, not a sign of struggle, just collapsed, as though he had been taken by some invisible force. Holmes led the way inside, his gaze darting about keenly as he surveyed the scene. The valet lay upon the study floor, his face pallid, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Watson bent down to examine him. Pulse is weak but steady, no sign of external trauma. He looked up. The grip marks, Holmes. Sure enough, upon the man's throat, the same faint impressions that Forsyth had described were now unmistakably visible. The door? Holmes asked. Locked from within, Forsyth said grimly. No sign of forced entry. Holmes crouched beside the stricken man, his sharp gaze sweeping over the valet's collar and lapels. Suddenly, he reached forward and plucked a nearly invisible strand of fibre from the man's coat. Aha, he murmured. He held it up to the light, his expression darkening. What is it? I asked. Holmes ignored me. Instead, he leaned in, sniffing the air with the precision of a bloodhound on a trail. A peculiar expression crossed his face, brief but unmistakable. Watson, he said softly, the answer is not in the hands, but in the air. Holmes remained crouched beside the unconscious valet, his fingers working with a precise delicacy as he examined the man's collar and lapels. His keen eyes flickered with interest as he plucked a nearly invisible speck from the fabric and held it up to the dim light. A curious residue, Watson, he murmured. Do you perceive it? I bent forward and saw the faintest powdery trace against the dark cloth. Some form of dust? I suggested. Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and produced a small glass vial, into which he carefully deposited the sample. Withdrawing a fold of white paper, he pressed it lightly against the valet's skin and held it to the light. A barely perceptible discoloration had appeared upon its surface. Most instructive, he muttered. Meanwhile, I continued my medical assessment. The pulse is erratic but strengthening. The airways are clear. There is no bruising upon the throat, no evidence of a true strangulation. It is as if... I hesitated. As if the man suffered an attack without an assailant, Holmes supplied. Precisely. His breathing is shallow, irregular, almost as if he has been drugged. Holmes smiled thinly. An astute observation, Watson. You are closer to the truth than you realise. I looked at him sharply. Then you believe he was not strangled at all? Holmes straightened and dusted off his hands. My dear Watson, there was never any strangulation, only the sensation of it. This man was paralysed, not choked. Forsyth, who had been listening with growing unease, gasped. But how? The marks, his throat. Superficial impressions, Holmes said. Possibly caused by a reactive muscular contraction, the body's response to a potent compound introduced through inhalation or dermal absorption. He was made to feel as though hands gripped his throat when, in fact, there were none. A phantom's grip, I mused. Holmes smirked. No, my dear Watson, a concoction most cleverly applied. And that, gentleman, suggests a mind of rare ingenuity behind these events. He tapped the vial in his palm before slipping it into his pocket. Come, Watson, our next course of action is clear. Holmes wasted no time upon our return to 221B Baker Street. The moment we stepped inside, he set about analysing the mysterious residue under his chemical apparatus, while I leafed through the latest police bulletins for any mention of past cases that bore resemblance to the strange symptoms we had observed. After several minutes, Holmes spoke. Watson, cast your mind back to the events Forsyth relayed to us. Did he mention any recent disputes, financial or personal? I frowned, recalling our prior conversations. Only the usual. Some minor disagreements in business, refusals of loans. But surely... Ah! Holmes interrupted, his eyes gleaming. That, my dear fellow, is where the true mischief lies. Mr. Forsyth refused a substantial loan to one Alistair Crane, a name that should interest us greatly. I set my newspaper aside. And why is that? Holmes leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Because Alistair Crane is no mere businessman. He is a financier with deep ties to the remnants of the Hades League. Forsyth, who had remained silent, let out a sharp breath. Then you believe. I believe that coincidence is rarely so convenient, Holmes said. Your so-called haunting began precisely after you denied him a loan, and let us not forget, the Hades League was once known for employing theatrical methods to inspire terror in their enemies. You think Crane seeks revenge? I asked. Holmes's expression darkened. I think he seeks something more. The answer, Watson, lies not in ghosts, but in men who wish to become them. We had scarcely begun to piece together the implications of Alistair Crane's involvement when a new development presented itself. Just past midnight, a messenger arrived at 221B Baker Street, breathless and dishevelled, with word from Forsyth's estate. There's been a break-in, sir, the man stammered. The study. Someone got in, though the front doors were bolted, and the staff heard nothing. Holmes sprang into action at once, calling for a cab. Within the hour, we stood in Forsyth's study, the air thick with tension, as Forsyth gestured toward the writing desk, its lower drawer pulled ajar. Nothing seems to be missing, he said, bewildered. The silver, the valuables, untouched. Holmes, however, was already at work. He knelt by the desk, running his fingers along the inner panels, his movements slow and deliberate. Suddenly, his hands stilled. With a deft motion, he pressed upon a concealed latch, and a hidden compartment slid open. Forsyth inhaled sharply. I never knew that existed. Holmes reached inside. Nor, it seems, did our intruder until tonight. The compartment was empty. Watson frowned. Then whatever was here was the true target. Holmes dusted off his hands. Indeed, Watson, a man does not break into a locked study for what he can take, but for what he must erase. The Hades League is not merely haunting Forsyth. They are seeking something. And I dare say we are about to find out what. Holmes wasted no time. By noon the next day, we found ourselves at Scotland Yard, sifting through old criminal records under the wary eye of Inspector Lestrade. The Hades League, Holmes muttered, flipping through a yellowed dossier. An organisation known for secrecy, violence, and, if I am not mistaken, science. He stopped abruptly, tapping a report dated 1875. Ah, here we are. Watson leaned over his shoulder. The file contained accounts of a chemical compound once used by the gang to induce paralysis and hallucinations. Victims reported the sensation of being choked by unseen hands, their bodies frozen by a vaporous toxin. I exhaled sharply. They could make a man believe he was being strangled. Holmes nodded, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. And if one were to believe in ghosts, Watson, what better trick could there be? He snapped the file shut. Come, my dear fellow. The game is nearly played out, and I believe our phantom is about to meet a most corporeal end. Holmes had formulated his plan with astonishing swiftness, as was his habit when the end game was in sight. Alistair Crane had been patient, cautious, working from the shadows. But now, Holmes meant to draw him into the open. Our adversary believes he holds the advantage, Holmes remarked as he paced our sitting room at 221B Baker Street. He has constructed an elaborate stage filled with ghostly terrors and unseen hands. But let us see how he reacts when the curtains are pulled away. Forsyth, still pale and shaken, sat stiffly in his chair. What do you mean to do, Mr. Holmes? Holmes turned sharply. You, sir, will depart London at once, or so it shall appear. You will take a very public carriage to Charing Cross, ensure that you are seen boarding a train, and then slip back into your home under cover of darkness. Watson frowned. Surely you don't expect Crane to attempt another attack so soon. Holmes smiled thinly. My dear Watson, fear makes men reckless. Forsyth's supposed departure will give our phantom a sense of security. He will strike again, of that I have no doubt. Lestrade, who had been listening with arms folded, gave a sceptical grunt. I hope you're right, Holmes. I don't much care for sitting in a dark room waiting for ghosts that aren't ghosts. Holmes inclined his head. Then it is fortunate that you shall not have to wait long. And so, that night, we returned to Forsyth's study, where the three of us, Holmes, Lestrade, and myself, waited in absolute silence, shrouded in darkness. Holmes had taken up position by the fireplace, while Lestrade and I concealed ourselves behind the heavy curtains. The clock upon the mantel ticked away the minutes. Outside, the city slumbered. And then, just as the hour struck midnight, the air in the study began to shift. A slow, insidious chill crept into the room, as though the very air had thickened with some unseen presence. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a thin mist began to rise from the floor, curling about the furniture, coiling in ghostly tendrils. I felt an unnatural tightness in my chest. My breath came harder, the air thick and cloying, suffused with an odour both chemical and sickly sweet. Lestrade let out a soft curse from the darkness. Fog? Inside the room? Holmes's voice came, low and calm. Steady, gentlemen. The performance is beginning. At that precise moment, the study door creaked open, though no hand had touched it. I stiffened. Before me, in the murk of the study, I could just make out a shadowy figure. Forsyth's silhouette, trembling as if held by some unseen force. A low whispering sound rose in the room, soft at first, then growing, a spectral voice from nowhere. I swallowed hard. Holmes, I whispered. What in God's name? And then it happened. Forsyth's body convulsed, his limbs stiffening, his breath rasping in his throat, his head jerked back, his hands clawing at his own neck as though some phantom grip had seized him. I took a step forward instinctively, but the moment I did, a terrible weight pressed upon my chest, a cold, unseen force constricting my lungs. Lestrade groaned beside me. I can't breathe. My vision swam. I reached out blindly, my fingers grazing the heavy drapes for support. Holmes, however, remained perfectly still, his voice cutting through the haze. Not the hands, Watson, he murmured. The air. With that, he sprang into action. In one swift motion, he lunged toward the wall, his fingers pressing against the intricate panelling beside the fireplace. There was a sharp click, followed by a hiss, a rush of air escaping from some hidden mechanism. Instantly, the mist began to dissipate, retreating like a tide drawn back into the sea. The crushing weight in my chest vanished, leaving me gasping for breath. Lestrade stumbled forward. What the devil? Holmes straightened, dusting off his hands. Gentlemen, he said coolly, I believe we have caught our phantom. For a long moment we stood in stunned silence, the mist still lingering faintly in the air. My breath came in ragged gasps, my limbs trembling from the strange affliction that had seized me only moments before. Beside me, Lestrade muttered an oath, rubbing at his throat, as though still feeling the phantom grip. Holmes, however, had already turned his full attention to the wall panel he had pressed. Producing his lantern, he directed its beam across the dark wooden surface, his keen eyes scanning for the secret he had just exposed. There, he murmured, stepping forward. His long fingers traced a fine seam in the woodwork, nearly imperceptible to the untrained eye. Then, with the slightest pressure, he pressed against the panel once more, A section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow metal pipe embedded within the woodwork. "A ventilation system," Holmes declared. "Ingenious in its design, yet rudimentary in its execution." He turned to me. "Watson, what did you observe just before the attack?" I steadied myself. The air, it grew thick, heavy. My lungs felt constricted, as if... I hesitated. "As if a ghostly force had seized you," Holmes supplied. He gave a knowing smile. "And yet, no ghost has ever required the aid of chemical vapours." Lestrade, now recovered, leaned in to inspect the mechanism. "Then you're saying this whole thing was staged?" "Precisely." Holmes gestured to the pipe. This ventilation system was used to disperse a hallucinogenic compound into the air. The effect would have been instantaneous in a confined space, hence why every attack occurred in an enclosed study. The chemical induces paralysis, breathlessness, and vivid sensory hallucinations, hence the phantom grip. A look of understanding crossed Lestrade's face. "Then that means, Holmes interrupted, "that our so-called spectre is no more than a man, a very clever but very mortal man." Lestrade straightened. "Right then, we'll have this place searched from top to bottom. No more hiding places." Holmes's expression darkened. "A wise decision, Inspector, but we need not search far." He turned his piercing gaze toward the darkened corner of the room, where the mist had yet to clear. "The architect of this deception is already here." A slight movement in the shadows confirmed Holmes's words. Lestrade let out a cry and lunged forward, but Holmes raised a hand to stay him. "Patience, Inspector," he murmured. "Our man has gone to great lengths to remain unseen. Let us afford him the honour of a proper introduction." Slowly, a figure stepped from the darkness. His posture was upright, almost defiant, his features calm despite being caught in the act. There was no need to speak his name, for we had already deduced it. "Alistair Crane, I presume," Holmes said smoothly. The man gave a slow, almost mocking bow. "I commend you, Mr. Holmes. I had hoped to remain unseen a little while longer." Lestrade scowled. "You won't be unseen much longer. I promise you that." Holmes ignored the exchange, his eyes fixed upon Crane. "You orchestrated this entire deception," he said. "But what intrigues me most is why." Crane smiled faintly. "I merely fulfilled a promise made long ago by men greater than myself." Holmes retrieved something from his pocket and held it aloft. The black ace of spades. "Ah, yes, the Hades League and their charming customs." He turned the card between his fingers. "This was not merely a threat, was it? You sought to invoke a ghost long since buried, to convince Forsyth that his family's sins had come back to claim him." Crane's smile did not falter. "A frightened man makes mistakes, Mr. Holmes." Holmes nodded. "And you hoped Forsyth's terror would drive him to surrender his financial control to you, perhaps even sign over the very assets he had once denied you." Forsyth, who had remained silent until now, gasped. You sought to ruin me." Holmes sighed. "My dear Forsyth, ruin was only the first step. Had this continued, you might have left London altogether, seeking sanctuary in some distant country, leaving your estate and wealth in the hands of a most trustworthy executor." He turned to Crane. "A simple, effective scheme, but flawed in one crucial aspect." Crane's eyes narrowed. "And what is that?" Holmes smiled. "You underestimated me." Lestrade took a step forward. "Alistair Crane, you are under arrest." Crane's expression did not change. "Tell me, Mr. Holmes, was it the mist that betrayed me?" Holmes shook his head. "No, Mr. Crane, it was the ace of spades." You wished Forsyth to believe a ghost had come to claim him. But the ink on this card was barely dry. No spirit delivers messages written in modern ink. A flicker of amusement crossed Crane's face. A clever deduction. Holmes returned the card to his pocket. Indeed, but I prefer to think of it as elementary. With Crane now firmly in Lestrade's custody, Forsyth sat heavily upon his chair, still pale from the night's revelations. But how, he murmured, how did he make me believe, truly believe, that I was being strangled by an unseen force? Holmes exhaled, his sharp features alight with the satisfaction of a puzzle well solved. Fear, Mr. Forsyth, is an artist's tool, and your adversary wielded it with considerable skill. Let me lay bare the mechanics of this so-called haunting. He gestured toward the hidden ventilation system. The attacks always occurred in enclosed spaces, where the air was still. Crane introduced a hallucinogenic gas, a precise formula designed to induce paralysis and breathlessness, mimicking the sensation of strangulation. Once inhaled, the victim's mind did the rest. Forsyth shuddered, and the whispers, the voices in the dark. Holmes nodded toward the panelling by the fireplace. A concealed phonograph recording, set to play at a whispering volume. Placed within the walls, the sound would seem to emanate from nowhere. A most clever illusion. Watson frowned, and the impression upon the chair. Holmes smiled. Another psychological trick, my dear Watson. Before each attack, weight was subtly placed upon the velvet. A small, heavy object, enough to leave a faint imprint. The mind, already conditioned for terror, perceives it as proof of an unseen presence. Forsyth buried his face in his hands, and I fell for it. Holmes tapped his fingers against the desk. Not the hand of a ghost, Watson, he murmured, but the hand of a man playing one. Alistair Crane stood motionless, his hands bound by Lestrade's men. His expression was unreadable, yet I saw the faintest flicker of something. Defeat, perhaps, or merely the realization that his elaborate ruse had been completely unraveled. Lestrade regarded him with a mixture of triumph and irritation. You gave us quite the chase, Crane, he said. But the game's up now. Crane exhaled slowly, then gave a mirthless chuckle. A most impressive display, Mr. Holmes. I should have known better than to try my hand against you. Holmes inclined his head. Your plan was exceptionally executed, relying not on force, but on fear. A man convinced he is being hunted by the supernatural is far easier to manipulate than one facing a mere mortal adversary. Crane's lips curled in amusement. I see there is no use in pretense then. He turned to Lestrade. Yes, Inspector, I confess. I bribed Forsyth's staff, a few well-placed words, a handful of sovereigns, and suddenly the house was filled with whispers of curses and vengeful spirits. The mind is a delicate thing, easily led astray. I stiffened. And the figure in the shadows? Forsyth swore he saw something moving in the darkness. Crane nodded. An accomplice, a man well versed in the art of evasion, who knew how to linger at the edge of perception, never fully seen, but always suspected. I shook my head in disbelief. So much of what seemed supernatural was mere misdirection. Holmes gave a small smile. That, my dear Watson, is the very foundation of a magician's trick, diverting attention where you wish it to be. And Mr. Crane is nothing if not a magician of deception. Lestrade motioned for his men to remove the prisoner. We'll hear the rest at Scotland Yard. Crane turned back as he was led away. Tell me, Mr. Holmes, was there ever a moment you truly believed in ghosts? Holmes smiled. Not for an instant, Mr. Crane. The dead may whisper, but it is always the living who speak loudest. The events of the night still weighed upon Forsyth, who sat with his head in his hands, clearly struggling to come to terms with all that had transpired. At last, he looked up. I cannot understand it, Mr. Holmes. It was all so real. Holmes, ever patient, steepled his fingers. Allow me to explain, Mr. Forsyth. It begins, as all great illusions do, with a single, carefully placed suggestion. In this case, the ace of spades. He withdrew the blackened playing card from his pocket. You saw it not as an ordinary piece of pasteboard, but as an omen of death, because you had been conditioned to do so. The Hades League once used it as a mark of execution, and Crane ensured that you knew of this history before delivering the card to your door. Forsyth swallowed. And the attacks? Holmes gestured toward the fireplace. The answer, my dear sir, lay within these very walls. The hidden ventilation system was used to release a hallucinogenic compound, inducing paralysis and the sensation of asphyxiation. That was the so-called phantom grip. I felt a chill. So the victims were never actually strangled? Precisely, Holmes said. The chemical residue on their collars confirmed that they had inhaled a substance designed to mimic the effects of suffocation. The marks upon their throats were simply a reaction of the muscles, the body believing it was being choked. Forsyth shuddered. And the whispers? Holmes gave a faint smile. A concealed phonograph, playing a carefully recorded series of whispered threats. Placed within the walls, the sound would appear to emanate from nowhere. Your mind, already convinced of supernatural forces, did the rest. Watson exhaled. And Madame Varnet? Did she truly believe in the curse? Holmes shook his head. Not in the least. She was simply another pawn in the deception. By offering a cryptic warning, she reinforced the legend, ensuring that Forsyth's fear would continue to grow. I ran a hand over my face, overwhelmed. And to think, it was all there, in plain sight. Holmes leaned back, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. Indeed, Watson. But as I have told you before, the most cleverly hidden truths are those placed directly before our eyes. And with that, the case was closed. Forsyth sat in silence, his fingers gripping the arms of his chair as though to steady himself. The colour had returned to his cheeks, yet his eyes remained haunted. At last he exhaled, rising to his feet with some effort. Mr. Holmes, he said, his voice measured. You have saved me from a fate far worse than ruin. Had you not intervened, I shudder to think what madness might have overtaken me. Holmes inclined his head. You were ensnared by a deception most cleverly executed. But fear, once unraveled, has no power to bind. Forsyth shook his head. Even so, I cannot remain in this house knowing how easily I was made its prisoner. Every shadow will seem to conceal another trick, every whisper a hidden device. He turned toward Lestrade. I shall have the estate thoroughly searched. Every panel, every floorboard. No trace of this sordid affair must remain. Lestrade gave a satisfied grunt. A wise decision, sir. And as for Crane, he'll find no hidden panels in Newgate. He motioned to his men. Take him away. Crane, still composed despite his defeat, merely smirked. You may remove the illusion, Forsyth, but fear will always remain. That is the truest phantom of all. Lestrade scoffed. You'll have plenty of time to reflect on that, Crane, behind solid, tangible bars. As the door closed behind them, Forsyth turned once more to Holmes and myself. I owe you a debt I cannot repay. Holmes waved a hand. Then let us settle it simply, Mr. Forsyth, by ensuring that the only ghosts in this house remain those of memory. We departed Forsyth's estate as dawn began to break over London, casting the first pale light upon the mist-laden streets. As we walked, I found myself still caught in the strangeness of the affair, my mind lingering upon the illusion of unseen hands and whispered voices. At last, I turned to Holmes. Tell me truthfully, Holmes, was there ever a moment, even for an instant, where you entertained the possibility of the supernatural? Holmes, who had been lighting his pipe, gave me a sidelong glance before striking a match. You disappoint me, Watson, he said. The dead have no power over the living, save for the fear we allow them. I smiled. And yet Crane's deception was nearly flawless. Had we not intervened, Forsyth might well have gone mad. Holmes exhaled a thin plume of smoke, his expression unreadable. That, my dear Watson, is the true horror, not ghosts nor curses, but men who weave fear into shadow and call it reality. He tapped the ashes from his pipe. The true spectres of the underworld, he said, are not the dead, Watson, but the living, those who thrive on fear and deception. I could not argue. And so, as we stepped into the bustling streets of London once more, I knew that the case of the ghostly grip of the underworld was finally laid to rest. As Holmes and I strolled along Baker Street, the weight of the case still lingered in my thoughts. The night's events had been a stark reminder of how easily the human mind could be manipulated, how fear, once planted, could grow into an unshakable reality. You must admit, Holmes, I said at last, Crane's deception was masterful. Had we not intervened, Forsyth might have been driven to madness or worse. Holmes gave a faint smile, tapping the end of his pipe. Fear, Watson, is a most insidious weapon. It does not wound nor kill, yet it can enslave a man as surely as any chain. Crane understood this well. He knew that the illusion of danger is often more powerful than danger itself. I shook my head. Even so, he made one fatal mistake. Holmes exhaled a thin stream of smoke. Indeed. But tell me, Watson, what do you believe it was? What do you think was Alistair Crane's biggest mistake? Was it underestimating Holmes, placing too much faith in superstition, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Enjoyed this Sherlock Holmes mystery? Make sure to subscribe for more thrilling cases, and if you have a friend who loves detective stories, share this mystery with them. Who knows? They may spot a clue even Holmes overlooked.